Hey, welcome back to another exciting discussion here on the Champions Path, a platform for all things simulation and training based for our champions in the military, law enforcement, and other emergency responder roles. Joining me today is Victor Castro, the Deputy Director of the Simulation Center at the famous Military Academy, West Point, and the Director of West Point's Esports team. And so we're going to be having a discussion around West Point's approach to esports, as well as the application of simulators in training for cadets. So, Victor, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I've seen you on several podcasts within the last couple of months, and you seem to be a very busy man over at West Point, as well as talking about the esports team and scene.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun because we get a chance to share a lot of the knowledge, your podcast does as well, gathering a lot of the information that people want to reference and really make a lot of great comments and back and forth on some of your social media and things. Mm-hmm. So it's great to share our perspective from, the United States Military Academy, federal entity wise, and some of the solutions we're doing with collegiate esports. Mm-hmm. But a lot of your audience would also resonate with the application of military sims. Mm-hmm. There's parallels with some of our National Guard brother and sisters, and as well as our police and law enforcement, fire, emergency response, things like that sims are a really big impact.
Yeah, excellent. And really to set the scene, the Champions Path has been a platform for, the promotion and adoption of simulation training solutions, the education on the science of efficient skills transfer and simulation integration into curricula aimed at enhancing the training experiences for a better skilled military service member and law officer. And a part of the rapid adoption of the technology that I've seen has been these technological generations. Myself, I'm a millennial, Gen Zers who are now entering the respective fields, and their exposure to virtual environments and video games has begun at such a young age. And it's really paved the way for the ease in transition from traditional training methods, the classroom instruction, the period of instruction, to hands-on practical application, to pressure testing in a field training exercise, qualification and certifications, and then recurring training. But with the technology, there's the new integration to supplement and augment along this training path. And that's what's incredible. And like I said, as a millennial, when I was a kid, I was first introduced to the 16-bit video games, the Sega Genesis, the Super NES. And, my parents saw it as really just a mind-numbing source of entertainment. And I guess, in part it's true, but, and at the time, physical sports, there was the duality of experience gained. In part, there was the entertainment of, playing the sports, as well as skills that came along with competing as part of a team against other teams, competing against other teams, actual human beings. And as these video games evolved into these complex multiplayer games competing online with other people, there's a lot of parallels with the skills transferred from video games to the real world. Correct. And I remember personally when I played an MMO later on, I was running a guild, and it came with a lot of virtual simulated responsibilities in leading these members, such as the resource management and coordination and communication with dungeon raids. And there was a rank structure from the guild leader all the way down to the common player. So at some point, the competitive esports leagues came up, and now some of these esports competitors are making an incredible living off of playing video games and competing in these world championships. So I'm really intrigued in the concept of an esports team for Army cadets to participate in, as there are, again, a lot of parallels between video games and virtual simulation training environments, skills obtained in live competitive games, as well as simulated training scenarios.
Absolutely.
So, I guess we'll start with esports at West Point.
Sure.
What's the backstory on the stand up of an esports team?
Well, you make a lot of great points into understanding the differences between what a student is comprised of today, what they've might have been. So we obviously have a nice blend of a lot of different Army officers, senior enlisted, soldiers, and then the students themselves. So everybody here at the Academy is working towards the superintendent's mission, his annual guidance in regards to different lines of effort that support each department's guidance. So when we're looking at simulations, we obviously have technology, we have equipment in place for the primary mission that's, to train cadets. That methodology is a crawl, walk, run methodology. So we're introduced to basic learning, for example, learning how to land navigate. It's a very, old teaching, regulation that discusses land navigation, but still the learning is very relevant for the needs of the Army. What's starting to change, though, is the delivery method of the learning. So we're starting to see more technological advanced applications of the learning. But we would all agree in the learning community and education community that the learning is still technically the same. Employ the compass, identify points and move to those points. So what you and I went through coming in through gaming is like getting out into, touching grass and playing sports and things like that. We're still this win-loss, understanding ourselves and having a challenge to work hard where it was like that. And then you start to introduce games and then there's a little bit more of an entertainment value to that. And then it starts to get to, hey, am I better than you? Are you better than me? And then a little bit of the competition starts. And so for here at the United States Military Academy, we have our simulations efforts in regards to the crawl, walk, run methodology, for example, with land navigation. So when I was in the Army, we were taught land navigation by here's the concept of the learning. Now get out into the kinetic aspect of the training and hopefully you do well. Some of those instances would have been positive, but for me, it was a little bit negative because I didn't find all the points I wanted to find. I was walking through water, all the different things that were going on. So we've learned a lesson on how learning can be delivered to get as much positive results out of the training we can get. So we've instituted simulations as a walk phase. So now students are introduced to the preliminary learning in a day one environment, which is our crawl. And then they'll come into a simulated environment for a first-person game-based environment called Virtual Battlespace. Virtual Battlespace is a Bohemia Interactive Simulations product. It was purchased by the Army as a program of record, and it's distributed throughout the whole entire Army through our Mill Gaming site and for the distribution agreements. So now what happens is different entities, Force Com units, TRADOC units, mobilization units, and here at the United States Military Academy, we're able to put together a VBS lab. This lab caters to about 60 user stations, about 15 admin systems that run the software itself in a virtual lobby. And now we empower instructors to say, hey, this sandbox style software platform can give you these walk phases of your learning. So lessons 1 through 9 is describing, maneuvering across a terrain in different, formations, a column or a wedge. So now the student doesn't necessarily have to imagine what that's like. They can go into the game-based simulation and experience it in a little bit of a capacity. That in turn empowers the instructor to say, hey, remember what we spoke about in lesson 8? This is what a wedge is for, or this is what a column is for. Go ahead and log into VBS 3. You're in this position. Now let's get a visual representation of the learning. Then when they're done with that and they have a coherence and then that understanding, the instructor can do a check on learning and then say, okay, next week we're going to be out in the field and I'm going to put you in that formation. Or they go into cadet summer training and there's a recognition from the learning. So now we're empowering instructors, we're empowering, cadet leadership to get the best out of their time allotted for the kinetic physical training that's going to be in the woods. Instead of trying to go through all the mistakes, we've actually solved all that in the simulated environment, which becomes a powerful tool for time, for money being spent, impacts on the environment, and then actual student buy-in. Because now we're giving them this environment where they can actually vest into the learning. We're looking at a good attitudes towards learning, not necessarily self-directed because everything we do in the Army is still very high stakes. It's supplantive learning, but it still allows them to have failures in a controlled environment. They have a senior instructor sitting right there for answers as to what right looks like. And the learning can be more positive more often. And then when they go to the environment, when they're physically going to go through it, and a lot of your viewers and listeners would understand, like this is the point where you get a no or a no-go, they're going to be a lot more confident in their ability to accomplish a task.
Yeah, that's incredible insight. I had a very similar experience when I was in the Marine Corps with the TCCC course and death by PowerPoint. You know, I was obviously a Marine because I wasn't in academics. Trying to pay attention. The classroom setting was quite difficult for me as a young Marine. And then going into the practical exercise of applying the nasopharyngeal or wrenching down the cat tourniquets. It was a very interesting concept because it didn't really, although I still remember the pneumonic march, with the massive hemorrhaging and airways and respiratory, circulatory and hypothermia. It's the real world transfer of skills. Could I actually save a life after that training? And I was afforded the opportunity to go to live tissue training courses where in the TCCC course, we would wrench down the tourniquets, for instance, and there wasn't an understanding of, well, did that actually stop the bleeding or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that is the purpose, the end goal of a tourniquet. Whereas in the live tissue training course, I was able to visually and physically wrench down a tourniquet to the point of stopping of the blood loss or applying a chest decompression to see the chest cavity concave and release that additional air. So I can see the application, and I've seen the application of simulations as a part of the integration into the training to bring the trainees through the journey more comprehensively as a very comprehensive crawl, walk, run process.
Absolutely. And then the testament there is to the technology being that deliverable tool. So again, we're not telling the public and all the different listeners that you're going to have this replacement. You're just resonating now for what students today are going to actually give more attention to and sustain their concentration into. So they are resonating with like things, almost instantaneous reactions in visual and audio and impact, like surprise, like, oh, that's amazing. And it's almost like super fast. So what we're doing better as educational designers and leadership in these academic institutions, to include service academies, is we're better understanding the student and what they're looking for in regards to, staying focused or staying passionate about the learning. And that's where the esports comes in. So if you imagine this virtual battle space environment, I have 60 stations, after 4:30, for some of our veterans at 16:30, they're like, what happens to the equipment? So in 2019, I had a couple of students stand up and they came to, hey, Mr. Castro, we're like, could we use this stuff? I'm like, well, absolutely. Like, it's yours, dude. I don't take it home, And what happened at that moment is I recognized that the students had an inherent passion, or they had their own intrinsic motivation to do something that they enjoyed and passion. So what I would ask your viewers to do is, if you have this resonate at anywhere from through K through 12 or any specialized capability, once you recognize that, you have the ability to layer learning into that focused, passion. So I was able to say, oh, absolutely. What are you trying to do? And then it all just spills out. And it turns out they wanted to play Rainbow Six Siege. They were already playing the game. Obviously the frustrations with their ability to do it on their laptop in a very limited bandwidth in a cadet barracks was somewhat frustrating. But again, that wasn't the mission. The mission is for them to learn and to graduate. But at the same time, we're going to do a better job of understanding that's where they're coming from. That's where their headspace is at. You can imagine a lot of universities, I would argue, it's high schools and middle schools also have somewhat of a concern about a student's attention in gaming, how much time is being dedicated to play a new title. I would just argue that you're not gonna fight against it. They're passionate about the things they enjoy. So why not take a different approach and meet them halfway? Why not say
great point.
Why not say, hey, if that's what you enjoy, I recognize that. This is how I want to help you. This is how I'm going to meet you halfway. If you spend 2.5 hours working on this game, you owe me 3 hours back for academics. You know what, Mom? All right. And I want you to show me how your interface with this game is something you're going to work hard at. Time management, for example, or being able to, hey, you want to go play? Just show me that all your homework's done. I got no problem with that, or whatever. Just I would just say meet them halfway. We did the same thing with our cadets. So now these cadets are going to come up to my academic space, use the computer systems I have in place. That puts me in a position to, continue to enforce standards, to continue to put them in a position to develop character. Now they're going to form themselves into one of the smallest teams, which is a fire team, which we agree in Army and Marine Corps, you have a 2-person team, the buddy team system, and then you have the 4-person fire team. So here with Rainbow Six Siege, in its design, you have a 5-person team that's now going to solve problems together, develop strategy, develop effective communications, label rooms, label buildings, use a correct weapon for the correct job, how to counter other weapon systems that are known to be true, and come up with a 70% solution. And then when they go into the game-based environment, they also have to react to change. So if you face an opponent that actually got your number and they know the strat you're about to use, how do you immediately respond to that and either make a change on the spot or learn from it when you get whooped up on that map?
Right.
So that's where that AAR, the after action review, comes into place. And we continue to practice the things that the academy wants out of our cadets. And to take it one step further, we put a cadet in a leadership role to deal with the challenges of what happens in a lot of gaming and small teams, either casually or competitively, is they argue. Hey, it's your fault, or I wasn't here. Where's the respect? Where's the professionalism? You're probably familiar in your time as a Marine Corps where you had somewhat of a sensing session or an AAR where people got after the problem. And you know as well as I do, one of the rules of that is if you do identify somebody's shortfalls, you have to offer a solution to it. You can't just go in there and start bashing people left and right.
Right.
I didn't like how you did this, and this is how I think I would like it, how it made me feel or how I think it could be done better. And then somebody in a leadership role is going to consolidate all those ideas and come up with a new way to do it. So that's how we blended it.
Yeah, that's true. It's just a bitch unless there's a fix. So,
Yes.
You've pointed out a ton of great insight, and I think what's commendable is that the identification of interest and capitalize on that, as well as utilizing the resources to continue and foster that education environment. And I'm really curious as to the esports kind of setup at West Point, because I can imagine at West Point there's a purpose for all cadet activities, and again, when I was in the Marine Corps, for instance, at Parris Island for recruit training, there was only a finite amount of time to prepare us to become Marines. And so all activities had a purpose and nothing we did was without purpose. Right. What are the primary goals of West Point's esports program?
Well, it's again, it revolves around the academic year 25 superintendent priorities. So his guidance is specific. Obviously regulations are everywhere. The regulation that governs the Army West Point Esports program is USMA Regulation 28-1. And inside of that, each one of the sections define all different aspects, but more specifically in this answer is the management of time. Well, different clubs that function here at the academy have different roles. We obviously have the NCAA division here. That is our most outward facing component with our football program, our women's basketball program, all these different things that put our cadets up against some of the best universities in the United States and, in Canada and other places. One tier down from that is our intramural, competitive environments, what we call core squad, where you have your women's rugby, you have your wrestling programs, still dynamic in every aspect, but not necessarily governed solely by the NCAA. They work in leagues like the ECAC or different agencies that allow these cadets to compete at that level. Then you have an agency on the West Point called the Directorate of Cadet Activities, where now they're going to take all these different clubs and have them done into categories like religious clubs or hobby clubs. For us in particular, it's military club. And the reason esports is in a military club is because our design is team in nature. You obviously have a goal, achievable goal. A lot of the different systems that we use, again, we use all titles like Overwatch, League of Legends, Valorant, Call of Duty, pretty much have a primary weapon system and a counter weapon system. So it makes sense that the thinking is revolving around a military club, yet it's still competitive.
Interesting.
So that infrastructure allows us to, model all these different clubs and things like that into those different categories.
And that makes sense. And, you had mentioned teams and, a team lead and, and you had mentioned Rainbow Six and the communication and the coordination and the movements and counters and
Yeah.
and moves, offense, defense. What is the esports, or how is the esports team broken down? Is it similar to a fire team? Is it similar to a squad where there's specific West Point esports titles that the cadets compete in? So how's that work?
Well, we try our best to try to also create a casual environment. So if a young cadet comes to us saying, I just love everything about this, I want to learn from scratch. Oh, very good. Come with me. Here's a keyboard and mouse. Like, it can go that far down.
Okay.
But if they have any type of casual approach, we obviously want to give them somewhat of a second home. And that's what we hope that happens, is an individual knows they can come to this academy and there's going to be something there for them. So that's really important as they make it into missions, and they go through learning about the academy and joining the website. Then you have the competitive cell, that's going to be the varsity program that says, hey, we're going to be the ones that really battle that winning culture that the academy is really looking for in regards to this particular space. So in knowing that, we make sure that we selected titles that are, that parallel with, the structure of a winning culture. I'm not saying any of these titles are bad in any way. I love them all as well, but we're not going to see us do a lot of single player battle royale. You're not going to see us do any particular game titles that just have one cadet versus another individual, because we're missing the mark on a little bit of the communication aspect. I mean, still tough. You still have to have a strategy. You still have to be well practiced, but we're going to miss the ability for them to communicate left and right and things like that. So having picked the different titles, we have a total of 7. Out of the 7 titles, we knew we wanted to do at least 2 teams per title with the black and gold design, that being our main colors, black being our varsity team, gold being our junior varsity team. The idea is that the varsity team is going to be up against it. They're going to send the best of our best against all the different other universities. And then our junior varsity team is going to be in a position to fill in the blanks if somebody has to step away or they're having academic challenges. So to lead every one of these titles, we've mirrored the military structure to create a fire team leader, pretty much a cadet captain for each title. This could be somebody that's decided to take on the challenge, because as you know as well as I do, you just spoke about it earlier about the administrative increase about your time with Dungeons, right? You just have that much more work to do to organize all your friends together. This is what this cadet is now going to do. He or she is now responsible for the game title itself, all of its scrim design, making sure all the, our Excel spreadsheets are completed, sizes and Discord names, all the logistics are done, and they handle the title. Each one of these game captains reports back to a cadet in charge. This cadet in charge now is your platoon leader. And there you have that breakdown. So we have a total of 75 players in the program. And then of the 7 titles, we have 11 teams across all 7 titles. So there's your whole entire, more than a platoon, almost short of a company. And this cadet in charge now forces the game captains to create these environments of good culture, professionalism, and character, and they all report to him. So thus that army structure of communication up and down.
Right. And it would make sense that you would choose titles for the team capacity, because any military branch, it's not the single individuals. Makes sense. Do you guys compete in tournaments? Have you won any titles? Yes. What does that look like?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, we get back to talking about, time. So the challenge there is keeping it decentralized. We try to keep it so that the cadet leader is dealing with those challenges. You have a monetary concern too. Like in the early start of 24, we were a little bit short on the budget. So I had to pick a location to pay one flat rate for all of our games to be able to compete at under one flat rate. We had some support come back in from one of our principal sponsors. So we had a little bit of increase in our operational, costs or our operational budget. So I was able then to turn to the CIC, and he gave direction to the game captains for each one of them to go whatever league direction they wanted to go. Because you can imagine, if you know anything about Rainbow Six, most of the collegiate successes in, Face It or Collegiate R6. Apex wants to play in Octane. League of Legends is obviously training towards Collegiate League of Legends or CLOL. So every one of them is now going to move in different directions. But the major players are the NACC, the ECAC, Collegiate Call of Duty, which is also known as the CCL. And every one of them comes at individual costs. So what the CIC does is ask each one of these game captains to do a hard analysis on impact onto the budget and make those types of decisions that arguably are parallel to what a lieutenant should be responsible for doing in reporting to the commander in some capacity.
Right. Makes sense, because, with a finite budget, there's only so many live training exercises, FTXs or, training and readiness exercises.
Absolutely.
And there's the logistics of it, moving entire units. In the Marine Corps, we trained. I was stationed here I'm in North Carolina here at Lejeune, but we would go to Fort Bragg and train. We would fly out to 29 Palms and train. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it makes sense that cadets would be in charge of the resources and the cost analysis and the troop movements and understanding the participation.
But then it gets back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it gets back to that time management thing too. Mm-hmm. So we challenge this cadet captain to say, hey, if you're willing to take this on, obviously you're going to be incentivized with the ability to label yourself as a captain and get this. We do evaluation reports for our cadets. We call them positive cadet observation reports. And we can say, they're mentoring other players. They're mentoring subordinates. We make relationships and coordinations to military, what we call an MD grade, a military development grade. And those are incentivizations for somebody to take on the tougher role, be it not super tough. They just got to do a couple more things, answer emails, jump on Discord, make a meeting or two. But still, if it wasn't there would be impact, and we would be like not as organized, and we wouldn't have as much success down to the lowest echelon.
Yeah, and it's a lot more involved than I initially thought, because there's huge opportunities to refine these skills, and not in comparison to any other institution that has an esports team, but it seems like there's a lot of purpose in erecting an esports team at West Point. So, going beyond esports, at West Point, there's a simulation center, and, you touched on land navigation and various forms of simulators to aid in cadet skills development. So, can you expand upon what types of simulators are available for cadets to train on?
Yeah, well, if we understand the cadet as a student, they're brought into the academy with either some knowledge of the military aspect, or having been a part of a military family, or somebody who is the first person in their family to serve. What we're responsible for here at the academy is making sure that all candidates are qualified fully, for admissions. And when they get here, they're physically prepared and mentally prepared to be, challenged. They'll go through cadet basic training. And in that process, we still have all the different constraints as far as time and budget and things like that. So simulations finds itself inserted exactly where it needs for gappage. One of the applications, I think it was called an ISMIT in Marine Corps, and for us, it's the engagement skills trainer, which is now a requirement as part of the basic rifle marksmanship qualification, tables. It's a 6-day process. Day 2 sees students or soldiers experiencing the engagement skills trainer as a deliberate rehearsal of their day 4 live fire. So this system is another Army program of record. This is something that the Army provides as a subsystem. It's deployable, it's deliverable. We do a good job of stabilizing it and keeping it pretty much steady, because as you know, if you move a lot of equipment, it has this tendency to just break. Right. So our systems, we try to keep as permanent as possibly as we can. We do a good job of placing it so it's logistically placed to have a nice flow of movement. So we actually built a tent on one of the weapons ranges, and we inserted the engagement skills trainer right there on the weapons range. So now a student can get the deliberate rehearsal, which is required by regulation, and have them move right to the group in 0 range. So you have this pureness and this, recall of a short-term memory that lives with the student. Biggest emphasis is safety. So if we identify, a safety issue with an individual student, or not a lack of understanding, we can address it right away in a safe environment. Thus handing off this, I don't say product in a bad way, but we hand off this student as a product to the next stage of learning. And now there's an understanding that the sergeant that's in charge of the live fire range knows that the student that's coming has a base level of knowledge. Thus, we're also getting efficiency on these 3rd, 4th, and 5th day agencies before they get to the modified record fire range. And what we're seeing now is, again, we're getting a lot more first time goes or first time qualifications. Obviously people shoot again. We try to get a little bit of love. I know you've probably known some Marines that have shot like 5 times to meet the qual, and
not me though.
No, honestly, we're never going to admit that. But the idea too is that you want a first time go, you want it to be successful. It's a demonstration on your learning design, very military in nature. Everything, obviously safety is huge for us, but ultimately we can catch somebody at the Sims environment that needed a certain level of focus and training and give them what they need. Another thing that we do well is we look at the end state, the final stage, and we look at the product there. And the person that's responsible for that tower, or the lane instructor that's seeing that individual shooter, can take notes on, hey, we need to fix this. And they can send those notes all the way back to day 1 and day 2, and we can start fixing it early. So in the sim, maybe they're not understanding the tower commands effectively. So we would then change the tower commands and the learning on the sim range, so that now students will be prepared for that learning on that final stage.
Yeah, and what's great about simulators or simulations as a representation of reality, it's simulating reality, and getting the EST. Am I still here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I thought I lost you for a second. What was I saying? Simulations replicating reality. And what's great about the marksmanship trainers is the integration of ballistics, environmental conditions, so they can understand the distances that they're shooting. So that's what's great about the simulators, is that it does replicate reality, so much so that in real world environments, they have the experience in situations that might be resource intense, that they may not be able to do live exercises often, especially, the remedial training, getting them back into the trainers, if they do UNC. So there's big application for the firearms training simulations.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned VBS for the virtual battle space simulation. Are there any as well as for land nav? Are there any virtual simulations used to train cadets in leadership and decision making? And obviously that was copied into the esports program.
Yeah, so for that, getting to the academic coursework, we'll find that a student's taught how to communicate. So in their MS 200, they're starting to learn the operations order, the different paragraphs that go into that communication. Then they're starting to understand how they would structure themselves and the execution of the operation order. So the squad that's going to maneuver, the support by fire element. VBS will give us the ability to say, okay, you're here at this particular grid. Based on your op order plan and what your movement was going to be, go ahead and execute that movement. Now, given the sake of time with 55 minutes, we're going to kind of like magic move everybody within the vicinity of the learning, but they have to self-orient. So now the individual's ability to orient themselves to the map. And then you have the squad leader or the platoon sergeant that has to know everybody's location. So you have this, cohesive understanding where everybody's located. And now they're going to maneuver across this space. This would be difficult to do when you try to transpo X amount of people to a training area, given the time constraints. They can literally walk up to the sim center. They'll sit down into a first person system like VBS and know that this particular role is the machine gunner. This particular role is a grenadier. And now a cadet's going to stand up and say, okay, everybody, let's get in and let's maneuver to our first checkpoint. And then in the sim, they can see the challenges of not knowing who's on their left and who's on their right. Am I facing the right way? All the small mistakes that can happen. So that's that leadership role. The challenge with that is you're not going to have every single student be in that leadership role as often as you would like. So with the Thayer method here has us have a ratio of 1 to 20. So within a 55-minute period, you would probably get 4 to 5 cadets in a leadership role, and everybody else is role playing in a lot of these different fire teams and squads. So what our instructors do a good job of doing is just rotating out these different individuals so they can get a little bit of a couple of those reps to be that leader. But what also happens is, students that are not necessarily in the leadership role, we have a residual experience of the other people that are going through it. Good or bad, they're like, wow, that was horrible. I feel bad for them. But I also learned that, wow, that was horrible. I don't want to be like that. Let me learn from this. Or that was a great example of how I could have done this. I'm going to emulate that. And I actually got some kind of learning. So there's always going to be, it really depends on the instructor and how well the instructor uses the software to get after their learning objectives in that particular lesson in the curriculum.
That makes sense. With this about the crawl, walk, run method, integrating simulations into the traditional training process, changing it or replacing it, but integrating within, and starting with a more implicit to implicit periods of instruction, building up to the explicit, which is more experiential, with taking those lessons learned, getting hands-on experience, going into the virtual environment and testing, experimenting with, decision-making, and leadership. And so, Technology, and the new generation, like I had mentioned, coming in, is there greater engagement with simulation technology than traditional, classroom instruction or live practical exercises?
Yeah, I would hope so. I see it here obviously because we do a good job of knowing that we have shortfalls and instructors. Because imagine an individual teacher may have like hundreds of students, and they want to make themselves available to every individual person. But if Sims can get after some of the lessons that a student go in and do self-directed learning or asynchronous interaction with a virtual avatar, or some type of preset simulation that allows them to do those repetitions they're looking for, the instructor can be a little bit free to focus on the things that they need to focus on. That's one application. For us, it's more or less, we don't have some of the advantages of an ROTC model happens. And if you're familiar with ROTC, they have a university-based learning, but they have like a 3 to 4 hour lab towards the end of the week or bi-weekly. Imagine military training does well when you have these 3 to 4 hour blocks because you have the ability to do reps and they can evaluate each other. Here, we do it during the summer. And then throughout the week, we'll have a 75-minute period, but still that's not enough time to really ramp up the training, run reps, and then do a hot wash or an AAR to the scale what the Army's used to doing. But during the summer, we get all that back. So our students are doing the academic correlation between what they just learned. For example, a freshman just experienced basic rifle marksmanship, basic land navigation, basic first aid. So when they come into the academic year, their learning is then layered based on what they've already experienced. Then they come into their second year into the summer training, what we call cadet field training. And then there's more layered learning. That's been the solution here at the Academy for many, many years. What simulations is starting to do a good job now is in that 55-minute period, we're actually getting to the reps that the instructors want because the software is so intuitive now that we can get somebody in quickly. They're already prepared to run the training within the first 5 to 7 minutes. Students have kind of already learned the keyboard mouse controls because they did it as a freshman, and we're continuing to layer that learning. So we're actually getting that time back, which is crucial to a lot of curriculum. When you have a 40-hour course, imagine, if you will, because of Sims, I can get you to be a 43-hour course. So now we're taking 5 to 7 different lessons, and you're being able to test all of them at one time. But this is where the instructor comes into play. This is where the instructor has to be like, hey, I'm seeing elements of the learning. I'm able to grade against it. I'm very happy with the cadet's performance in all these different learning objectives. This is where the change is going to come into universities and a lot of stakeholders in these universities saying, yes, I agree. This is accredited. It's reliable. It's valid. We're okay with this. And then they'll start to see change. So now we're taking a 44-hour requirement, cramming it into 38 hours, and empowering the instructors to use technology as an ability to deliver learning.
Excellent. Victor, before we conclude, are there any other topics you'd like to dive into?
I think that we're all doing a good job, yours as well, is to identify all these different things. We're consolidating all the information as a repository so they can join your podcast. They can rewind and look at these different sections and say, okay, this could be a source for information to say, hey, this makes sense. What we're going to try to do well is look downwards. We're going to look at high school. We're going to look at middle school. Are we making pathways for individuals to set themselves up for success all the way through, esports being a pathway for that. Remember, esports doesn't necessarily have to be professional esports players. There's a whole entire marketing, there's a whole entire production aspect to esports. There's, upper level management, there's supervisors. So everybody that's working in some type of space, you can see esports as a test of your skill sets. IT, effective communications, public affairs, all these different things. Our cadets are getting the repetition they need through our esports program for just vocally, standing in front of people and doing public speaking. That's still a skill. Some people don't have the ability to stand up in front of a platoon and say things eloquently or with direction. And these programs, a lot of the clubs here in the Academy offer those reps that somebody would need. So I encourage anybody that's listening and joining us here today for the podcast to take a step back and look at simulations and technology to give you the time back you need. The repetition that somebody needs is not necessarily in the lesson, but it could be a subliminal learning. Or the one kid that's in your class that's a little bit quiet, put them in a position to public speak, but don't put any risk involved with it. Just let it be, an engagement for them, but don't assign a grade to it. Just let it be not a graded event. and you'll see them come out of their shell. You'll see them benefit from them. You might get a thank you, like, oh, I appreciate you doing that. We're getting that now with our esports program. Like, we have a couple graduating seniors, and they came back to me and say, hey, I really appreciate that this program was here for me, because I actually was able to do the things that I wouldn't have been able to do before, because I'm not necessarily a football player or a core squad athlete.
That's a really good point, because a lot of these simulators as part of training in skills development is stress inoculation, getting exposure to stressful situations, especially the high risk careers such as the military and law enforcement, other emergency responders, and having this program, like you were saying, a pathway for someone who might not necessarily want to join a, physical sports team or any type of public debate, club or any other type of club that they can gain that exposure, but they are interested in video games and technology. So that's a really great point, to allow another training skill set within stressful situations. Absolutely. And inoculate through experience. So Victor, again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
If anybody's interested in learning more about esports at West Point or the Simulation Center in general, where can you point them to?
Yeah, they can just go right to www.westpoint.edu. You can actually navigate, the westpoint.edu website that has all the answers for anybody that's interested in the academy as a future, endeavor. And then if you hit /esports, you'll just jump right to our page. You'll see some of our YouTube links, where to find us on socials. It's very simple. You can just type in Army West Point Esports on Google, and you'll see our Twitter, Instagram, our Twitch, and YouTube as well. And just know that when you sit down, you talk as a family, we're doing a good job now of, resonating with what you might be interested in regards to West Point being a solution for your future education and your future career as an Army officer. If it's not right for you, I highly encourage you to still explore, what the Army can provide. I'm not a recruiter per se, but I can tell you from my personal experience that it was a defining decision for me to join the Army. It really set me up for success. Allowed me to take care of my family and to be a provider. And now here I am, at a central point of influence for a future Army officer. So it was a great decision for me.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Hey, beat Navy.
Yeah, right. All right, brother.
All right, see ya.
So I am interested in, maybe your insights, your opinion, where West Point is going with the Simulation Center, and typical AI integration within simulations we see is very linear. They're either, these branching options within the AI algorithms, or it's rule based. If this, then that. And we're seeing the rapid advancement in machine learning, and some of these other more complex algorithms, especially with digital humans in conversations. So what, as well as augmented reality, and the integration of XR, mixed reality. So, what are your thoughts? What are, maybe some insights on the advancement of simulation?
Well, here at the West Point Simulation Center, we have an operations side. So, as an instructional designer, and we have another staff member that specializes in AR, VR applications. We're gonna pull the equipment in. We're gonna test it. We're gonna look at the different softwares. We're gonna try to really make those determinations, like what would this do to a student in regards to UI interface understanding? Are they gonna get hung up on being stuck with the interface and not let the learning transpire? Like, are we doing a good job of making sure that it's like very easy to navigate? Because you can spend 20 minutes just figuring out the menu, and then you're not getting into the actual learning just yet. So we're at that stage right now where we're pulling in these different pieces of equipment. We're looking at, okay, if you did have augmented reality, what's it going to do? A good example of how we're looking to apply it is a virtual map. So we have, we've experimented with downward projection systems onto sand and kinetic sand that moves and things like that. Really what it comes down to is you're just finding another way to project the learning that would have happened with, what you and I may have experienced with drawing in the dirt or having a pizza box with index cards and 550 cord. It's just getting that better and being more efficient. So now we're using augmented reality sand tables in such a way that your identifier for a blue force and a red force could be to scale. You can start to show flight corridors for aircraft, or arcs for some of your your artillery systems. So now leadership can have a holistic visual representation of even the movement of those different entities across the augmented reality space. What that does is it clarifies, or it cleans up a little bit of that communication, because visual representation of the infantry squad in relationship to the grid coordinate that they're going to be at can be done in an augmented reality or a virtual reality or a blend of the two. So you could have your HTC Vive or Elite, and I can be in a Magic Leap 2, and we're still looking at the same generated environment. So these different softwares now are getting after that visual solution problem in what we call live, virtual, and constructive. So that'd be more on the virtual phase. In constructive, you can still have the same augmented reality environments or virtual reality environments, but now you're backing up from the atmosphere a little bit more, and you're looking at the larger scale, mission. And that's the core level. Or, maybe you could take it down to a battalion or even brigade. So these applications now are solving some of the, the graininess or the cloudiness of communication on paper, or death by PowerPoint, when the commander or the different leadership can see those air assets or those artillery assets visually represented onto the augmented reality space. What we do know to be true, though, is that the physical hardware or firmware is still limited in its FOV or field of view. You're not going to get this full dynamic, rich resolutions on some of the avatars that are made, which is fine, because we're not trying to make it be super dynamic just yet. Is it solving the learning problem? And we think it is. We're investing here at the West Point Simulation Center. We're moving towards the augmented reality sand table. We actually just did a demonstration during our symposium for Projects Day, where students of ours demonstrated what the future classroom could look like for special operations, and where you can have this map and all of the different layers in, and they can literally be briefing that to a senior leader. This became interesting because they are commercial in nature. This was unclassified. But if you look at these different pieces of technology, how is that going to change? In response to your discussion about AI, we're very interested in the behavior models of avatars or non-playable characters in some of these games. Unfortunately, sometimes when you're using a first-person environment, you need somebody to be on the white cell on the other side so that the avatars are performing correctly. Some of the behavior models that are in current avatars, they just act wrong. They'll literally run out into the middle of the street and they'll wave, and they'll low crawl in the middle of the street. You lose a little bit of the authenticity when you're trying to get a soldier to respond to a crowd that's in a virtual environment. You're driving up with your vehicle, and there's a crowd in the street throwing rocks. Well, what if that AI model or the behavior models for those and non-playable characters responded almost correctly, as if I shout in the game, they respond to that. If I give somewhat of a virtual command, they either respond or don't respond, or they can yell back. There's different things that can change the training to make it that much more authentic with these new behavior model capabilities.